right, we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. The European Union recently passed a law that would essentially mandate many of the guidelines and metrics of the ESG scheme that we've talked about so much on this show. You might ask, well, who cares about Europe? Unfortunately, the way this corporate sustainability due diligence directive is written, it has the potential to fundamentally transform the way businesses around the world operate. It is imperative that we get this message out to the public and to lawmakers to protect America from this dangerous law. Join us as we talk about this topic and more on episode 453 of the In the Tank podcast. All right, welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me today, I've got the full crew. I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing just great. We talked just before we came on the air about the super brood of cicadas, two different cicadas broods coming out at the same time, and it's going to be especially bad in the Midwest. And you've complained for weeks now, Donnie, that you can't walk to your mailbox without crunching over grossly a bunch of cicadas, and that they're all over the place, and that they're noisy, and that I have seen like 3 cicadas where I live. I mean, you live not that far away from me, but
sure.
Somehow, once again, another climate panic or nature panic doesn't turn out, at least for me. I've only hit, I think, 3 cicadas with my car while driving around, but I've seen almost none where I live, which I am very grateful for. I'm not a bug guy. I eat bugs. But if we have to eat the bugs, I'm going to starve because I have no cicadas to harvest.
Yeah, I mentioned that, I don't mind them. My son thinks they're super cool, and my wife is just horrified to walk outside. So that's the reality that we're living in here. But also joining us, we have Justin Haskins, Senior Fellow for the Socialism Research Center here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing really well. I don't know if you guys saw this in the news. Coffee, copper, cocoa, gold, all-time highs right now. So all those coffee investments that I've got in my cabinets back there, I'm doing good. I'm doing really well. It's financially, I wish I had gold. Unfortunately, I missed the boat on that one. But coffee and cocoa, I'm stupid with that, so I'm doing really well.
Yeah, coffee. Is that what you're always smuggling back from Colombia, or is that something else?
Well, to be honest, you need the coffee with something else that helps you.
Got it. Right.
Not to. Right. This is a joke, by the way, for the.
We're already demonetized. We'll talk about that in a minute. Chris Talgo, you are the editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. But more importantly, some would say you're the heart of the podcast. Chris Talgo, how are you doing today, good sir?
Doing good, Donnie, and I want to wish you and Justin a early Happy Father's Day. So,
thank you.
Shout out to all the dads out there.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I think that dads kind of get the short end of the stick when it comes to these holidays. I think, we put a big dog and pony show on for the moms, and then the dads just get, what's left over. So I'm going to go out of my way to make this the greatest Father's Day ever for my dad.
Yeah, exactly. It's Mother's Day is like going out to dinners and getting chocolates and showering moms with all this praise and everything. And on Father's Day, I get the privilege of being able to cook food for everybody on my grill. That's doesn't seem to be nice. It doesn't seem to balance out. But
I'm not 100% sure that my wife knows it's going to be Father's Day. So we're going to find out on Sunday. So I'm not entirely sure. I've got a feeling she has no clue what's going on. So.
Audio only listeners that are probably catching the show on a Friday or later, leave a review for us on iTunes. That would be greatly appreciated. You could also join us a day earlier where we are live streaming this on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and X. You could join in the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. You can support the show by hitting that like button, sharing this content, subscribing if you haven't already, or just leaving a comment under the video. All those things help break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. I would say you could support the show by hitting that super chat button, but guess what? We've been demonetized, folks. Yes, the Heartland Institute YouTube channel and the Stopping Socialism TV YouTube channel have both at the same time, both been demonetized. Yes,
For
Justin.
What? This is the first I'm hearing of this.
You didn't hear about the Heartland one?
No.
Oh, yeah. So the Heartland channel discovered to be demonetized late last week. I think Friday of last week. And Jim, do you recall what they said? Because they're always very vague about the reasons why they demonetize us or give us strikes or anything like that. What was how'd they phrase it this time? Do you recall?
Yeah, I'm looking. I'm looking for it right here. Let's see. They said that we've been demonetized because of, quote, content that focuses on controversial issues and that is harmful to viewers.
Yeah.
Now, what they claim are controversial issues, they have a definition for that. And by the way, and YouTube, Google, Alphabet, whatever the corporate master is, did not actually specify or flag anything to let us know exactly how we had produced content that's controversial and harmful to viewers. This is what they claim is a controversial issue. Controversial issues are topics that may be unsettling for viewers, which are often the result of human tragedy. This policy applies even if the content is purely commentary or contains no graphic imagery. Controversial issues include child abuse, adult sexual abuse, sexual harassment, self-harm, suicide, eating disorders, domestic abuse, abortion, and euthanasia. Now, we do cover a cornucopia of topics on this podcast. We focus a lot on, climate realism and debunking the green energy myth, and how, and then as like we're doing today, we go after the global economic masters, and in Europe and at the World Economic Forum and here in the United States. Sure, you might consider those topics controversial, but they are in no way, they don't qualify for any of those.
Right.
I just said, I don't even want to say it again because, the algorithm can hear you. And so even saying those things, people say self-delete. Somebody, if they decided to go up to heaven and no longer be part of the earthly realm, I've heard a lot of people on YouTube say that person has self-deleted. So that's how you
unalived themselves.
Unalived. So yeah, we don't cover any of those issues. We don't talk about those issues.
I
and
think
no way is
forgetting about the eating
harmful.
disorder special that we did that one time.
Oh yes,
on eating disorders.
Yeah, it was all about Ozempic.
We don't go anywhere near any of these even remotely close to any.
Yeah, so this was a bit of a mystery when it came down, right? We were like, okay, well, we got these Linnea videos that we're doing these little 2-3 minute videos on all different host of climate change topics that are pretty, some of them are very popular. So maybe it was that. It was them trying to shut down our channel because we're having some effect with these new Linnea videos. But then when I saw yesterday, when I was setting up the stream, that our Stopping Socialism TV channel was also affected, that puts it squarely on our show. It has to be in the tank because it's, our show is on both of those channels, right? So it's got to be it. The latest video that we did was about Trump potentially facing 20 years in jail. So it must have been something in that. That's my best guess.
Everybody's doing that.
Well, we also spent a lot of time bragging on whether or not Joe Biden pooped his pants. So that could have been it.
Even more people did that one. What was in that? I mean, seriously, those are the Trump thing is the most popular topic probably on YouTube that week. There's no way that would be it. It's got to be something else. So they didn't flag, they didn't email us, they didn't. Because I thought there was a 3 strike system. Isn't that
That's
how it
for
works?
Oh,
that's
no, that's for like
copyright
deleting
stuff.
your channel. I think that's for like totally getting rid of your channel. This is
I
just
see.
demonetized. But thankfully, our development people have put together a nice little URL for anyone that's watching the show that wants to support our show financially. Heartland.org/in-the-tank. That'll direct you to a page where you specifically can donate to the Heartland Institute to support this show. So that's a big thing. We'll definitely be keeping tabs on that to see because,
Sure.
while this show is, in essence free to do, it still takes up our time, and our time, is scarce, right? So there is an investment that we put into the show, and to make it like worth doing financially, support from everybody watching is greatly appreciated. But if there's anything else on that note that you want to mention, Jim, you can have at it before we get into some of our topics.
No, I mean it's really annoying. And one of the things, it's not like we're we're making money hand over fist on this show, and that's not really the purpose of it, obviously. I mean, we're not professional YouTubers. A lot of us watch them, and they make a living producing their own content and shows, and they get super chats when they do their live streams. We were going to actually start a membership program where you could become a member of the channel and get exclusive contact and access and all of that stuff. And now that's out the window unless we get this thing remonetized. But having a monetized channel makes your channel more legit. The algorithm smiles more upon monetized channels than they do those that are not monetized. And I would think especially those that were once monetized and have now been canceled by the censors in big tech. So we have appealed it. We are going to see if we can get it back on. I mean, it's nice when some of our regular viewers both here and in Europe, and especially in the UK, we've even had some Australians donate to us. It's really nice. You kick us $10, $20, it makes us feel good. It helps. It does help the channel, but it's discouraging. I thought we were kind of beyond that. I keep thinking in my head canon, I keep thinking that Elon Musk owns YouTube when he only owns Twitter. So that's just the way it goes these days.
I just want to real quick add that so we haven't, I don't think we talked about this on this show, but we've also been struggling on Facebook forever just to get people to go to like the Facebook algorithm was altered at some point. We have hundreds of thousands of followers on Facebook, hundreds of thousands, like across all of the Heartland different channels. Stopping Socialism Facebook fan page, the Stopping Socialism TV Facebook fan page, the Heartland fan page, my personal fan page. We have like 500,000 plus followers on Facebook, and we get like literally zero traffic on our Facebook page now. After we used to get millions of people a month, now we are down to like maybe hundreds or thousands. Like that's how bad it's gotten. But then probably this like maybe 2 or 3 months ago, Facebook stopped allowing us to post on some of our Facebook pages. Right. They completely stopped it without, as far as I could tell, we violated some policy. I don't know what it is. I can't figure it out. I've gone through this absurd customer service thing, like labyrinth of different foreigners talking to me about this problem in the most obscure, complicated way. They don't even really understand it. No one can give me an explanation. I've been waiting for an appeal on this so that we can just post things to the channel. And nothing has, to those social media feeds. And I haven't even been, we barely use it. I mean, at this point, we're just reposting articles that have been published by people at Heartland, and that's pretty much it. Right. At major media outlets. So it's not like we're posting all this controversial stuff on there. There's nothing controversial about it. And we can't get an explanation for why that happened. Right. And so this is just, and as we'll see when we get into the main topic here for today's show, like this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, this is going to get a lot worse soon.
And to underscore that point on the show for a while now, I've talked about how we have like a whole bunch of different publications that we could get op-eds published in, articles published in, stuff like that, websites, whatever. And we've had a friendly one of these publications respond to us after pitching them a op-ed on climate change related topics, saying, hey, this is a great article, but unfortunately we can't publish this because if it gets shared on Facebook, that could throttle our whole account and all of that. So we're basically going to just stay away from climate change topics. This is a friendly, right-leaning publication that said this. And then, so I've been saying that for a while. Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I recall you more recently in the past couple of months saying that we've gotten another email response back to one of these op-ed pitches from a different conservative-leaning publication saying essentially the same thing, right?
Oh yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
this is an ongoing problem, and I think that, like you said, they're worried that if they publish a story like that, that they could, come under the grip of the censors, and they do not want to do that. So yeah, this is flat out censorship, and it's
Yeah. Right. So all of these things together just kind of shows that you can't rely on kind of these like passive ways of getting this content, whether it's like YouTube recommending our videos or something like that in your recommended feed when you go to YouTube, or going on Facebook and assuming that some of our posts will pop up in your news feed, or even just going to conservative publications and expecting to see some articles that are about topics that you think are interesting. You can't passively do this anymore. You have to like seek out this sort of stuff in this
yeah. But
environment.
Donnie,
That we're
but it's
in now.
even worse, because even if you go and Google this stuff, the Google results are going to be on page 7, 8, and 9, and you're not going to
Good point.
scroll to page 7, 8, 9 to get those results. I do a lot of research, so I Google lots of facts and lots of economic stuff and climate stuff. It's just every single time, the first 10, 20, 30 results are all, what they want you to see. But then if you dig deep enough, you can somehow find that, diamond in the rough with, the truth behind it. So
Mhm.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, it's across the board.
It's time. Basically, my message here is it's time to be proactive about the content that you want to consume. You have to like specifically look for our stuff. You have to go to heartland.org and check out what's featured at the top. Become a subscriber to like the Heartland weekly email that's sent around that has a listing of all of our best articles and videos and all the different events that are coming up or anything like that, so that you can ensure the content that you're interested in actually comes across your desk at some point. That's the world that we live in now. So things are changing seemingly by the day, but we're gonna keep on fighting here. But gentlemen, should we get to our topics at hand, or do you have anything else you want to say on this issue?
Nope.
Hearing nothing, I will jump into it. So the topic that we want to talk about is this radical new European Union law that we say in the thumbnail will fundamentally transform America. So people that have constant listeners of the show, you should be familiar with ESG. I mean, we've been talking about that for probably years now. I think most people listening understand what ESG is. This is the scheme that's advocated by the elitist left, places like the World Economic Forum. It's essentially a corporate social scorecard that forces companies to adhere to metrics that champion a whole host of different social justice causes, from diversity, equity, and inclusion to climate change and the destruction of reliable energy sources. And failure to adhere to these ESG metrics results in businesses losing access to capital, loans, other banking services. It can result in the businesses being politically disfavored when it comes to government contracts, stimulus projects, bailouts, a whole number of different things. So I've always said that at best, ESG is the biggest cronyist system ever devised by man. And at worst, ESG is a fascist system that the government and ruling class can use to control the economy and society by extension. But and we've been fighting against ESG for, as many years as we've been talking about it, and there's been some success. But one of the things that's been flying under the radar that's in this realm of ESG for quite a while now is this European Union version of it called the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. Around the office, we just call it the European Union's ESG, but it's called the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, CSDDD, but we'll probably just refer to it as Europe's ESG. And Justin, I'm going to start off with you because you've been the one that's been shouting from the rooftops about this issue for, I don't know, a year now, maybe more, to anybody that'll listen. And it took that long as you've been shouting about it, for this legislation to work its way through the European Union legislative process. And at one point, when we most recently talked about this, it was like dead. But as we feared in that same episode where we talked about it, it crawled out of the grave and crawled across the finish line in just the waning hours of the legislative sessions there over in Europe. So take it where you want. Tell us about this. The Europe's ESG scheme. Go ahead.
Yeah. So we've actually been talking about this, Donnie, for at least 3 years. I went back and looked. Yeah, because and the reason I know that is because on the book that we worked with with Glenn Beck, The Great Reset, which was a #1 best-selling book, nonfiction book when it came out back in 2022, start of 2022. This is in that book. We talk about this in that book, which means we were working with Glenn on that and we started that book in 2020. And so we were working on that at least in 2021. So this had to be something that we were aware of for at least 3 years, I would say. It's a pretty safe bet. And we also had it in the Dark Future book, which we released, in 2023, mid 2023. So we've been talking about this for a while. Essentially, this to me is, we talk about the Great Reset movement, World Economic Forum, Davos, big corporations all getting together, controlling society through the private sector and financial institutions, public-private partnerships between government and the private sector. This is the height of that. This is the pinnacle of it. This is sort of the dream scenario for people elites that want to control society, but know that they can't get everything through government. And so we have to have these public-private partnerships. So this law is the culmination of them working on this for 3 years, this plan. So this is the way that it would work. This CSDDD law requires that the European Union nations create laws that will force companies, large companies in the European Union, based in the European Union, to adopt these left-wing social justice, ESG, sort of climate change, anti-fossil fuels, all of that stuff that you think of as being ESG, left-wing ideology, force these companies to adopt these policies in their business practices, both within their company's business practices and within their subsidiaries and their contracts and all sorts of things. So not just what they do, but also the products and services and things that they offer to their customers. All right. But in addition to that, it also requires any company, any large company. So this is mostly about large companies, this part of the law that I'm talking about now. Any large company that does above a certain threshold of business in the European Union also has to do this, regardless of whether they're a European Union company. So an American company, for example, or a Mexican company, or a Canadian company, or a Chinese company, if they're doing this above this threshold, which is about $500 million in revenue. It's a little more complicated than that, but it's basically that. If you're doing $500 million a year in revenue in the European Union, net turnover is what they call it, then you're going to be forced to comply with this law as well. All right. So Ford, for example, does that much business more than that in the European Union. McDonald's, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, all of these companies, Amazon, they're all doing at least that much business. Many of them are doing much, much more business than that in the European Union. So they also are going to be required to adopt these left-wing government-imposed social justice, ESG, anti-fossil fuel policies into their business practices. The really, really insidious part of all of this, that's bad enough because you can change the world, really, in at least the Western world, just with that part of it alone. Because if you're changing what Apple and Amazon and Microsoft and McDonald's and all of these other big, massive corporations are doing, that's going to have huge impacts on societies all over the world, including America. Because it's not just about how they're behaving in Europe, it's about how they behave everywhere in the world. So it's not enough for McDonald's just to change the way they do business in Europe. They also have to change how they do business in America. All right. So it's going to change everything, or it's going to change a lot, just that one part of it. But what's really insidious about this is they go a step further, because that's not enough for them. They go a step further. One of the requirements for these companies that are brought under this rule in the European Union is that those companies must, to be in compliance, impose many of these same ESG standards on every company, or many of the companies, I should say, not every company, but many of the companies that they are doing business with as part of their chain of activities. It's mostly supply chain, distribution, storage, that kind of thing. Regardless of where those companies are located, regardless of how much business those companies are doing in Europe. So, for example, Ford sells cars in Europe. They sell a lot of cars in Europe, so they're under this rule, this ESG rule in the European Union. Ford buys, let's say, for example, Ford buys rubber from a rubber manufacturer that's in Ohio that does no business in the European Union. That doesn't matter. Ford has to force that rubber manufacturer to do everything that the European Union laws are saying that they're going to have to do, even if they don't do any business, because they do business with Ford. And if Ford doesn't force that rubber manufacturer to do that, then Ford is going to face these massive fines in the European Union. They may not be allowed to do business in the European Union. They can be sued by activist groups in the European Union for failing to do this. This is all part of the law. And it's not just one part of the supply. It's massive parts of the supply chain. Not all of it, but massive parts of the supply chain. So think about how this all plays out. So at first you might be thinking, okay, well, it's just, what is it? Just like manufacturers? No, it's everything. Okay. It's everything. It's everything that goes into the design and the production of these services and products that are being used and sold by these companies that operate in the European Union. So you're a potato farmer, and you sell potatoes to McDonald's for making French fries in America, right? The potato farmer, you do no business in Europe. It doesn't matter. McDonald's has to impose these ESG rules on you, or else they're not going to do business with you anymore. You're the transportation truck company that drives around different products and services being sold by these companies. You also have to be brought into compliance. You're the mechanic that works on the trucks. You're also going to have to be brought into compliance. You're an energy company that sells energy to these companies. You're just people who sell gasoline. Even them would be part of the supply chain for all of this. You're a marketing firm. You're a software company that part of what you do is you help McDonald's, or you help Amazon, or you help one of these companies. You do one tiny little part of some aspect of their business for them. You also have to be brought under this law. Mm-hmm. And the list goes on and on and on and on and on. By the time you play it all out and you just think about how far reaching this thing is, you realize literally it's unknown. Nobody knows exactly how many businesses will be required to do this, but we're talking about thousands of businesses affected by these policies, which are, by the way, that's the stated goal. This is exactly what they want to do. They want to transform the economies all over the world to adopt these EU values. And they want to do it through these corporations so that you have no constitutional right to stand up and say, well, Apple is saying that this is a real example. This would be a real example. One of the things that's in the EU law, very applicable to the Heartland Institute, is that you have to have policies. These nations in the European Union have to have laws that say that companies need to stop climate change related misinformation and disinformation on their platforms. That's part of what is required under this law. All right. Well, you're Apple. Okay. Apple hosts podcasts, including this podcast.
Right.
Under that European law, Apple can't allow for a podcast show like our show, which says things about climate change that is not in agreement with the standard EU view of things, can't allow us to have a show on Apple's platform. It can't even do business with a company. Apple can't even do business with a company that's doing business with us if it's part of their supply chain in order to bring that podcast platform into being, or some other thing that they do. It doesn't even have to be that. So you can see how this is going to transform everything. Right. All the big tech companies, all the censorship that will come from this, the transformation of agriculture, farming, manufacturing, fossil fuel industry must be killed by this, or these companies have to completely stop doing business in Europe. I mean, we're talking about the entire transformation of the United States economy, culture, free speech being eliminated. This is the most insidious, ingenious, diabolical public policy plan I've ever seen put forward. I think it's the most important story in the country today, which is really saying something, because I know with Trump and everything that's going on, there's lots of important stories, but it touches on so many other things. And almost no one knows about it, which is incredible.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of questions that are coming in that I want to come back to you, Justin, to answer some of these. But just to get Jim and Chris back into the podcast here. Chris, one of the things that I find remarkable about this is that in our whole fight against ESG over the last several years about this, you get people in the United States, even on our side of the aisle, that'll just kind of dismiss it like, oh yeah, it's not great, but voluntary interaction between whatever. They kind of dismiss all the coercion and all of that stuff or whatever. But in this case, Europe's just mandating it. So it's not even about, there's not even the illusion of like voluntary interaction here. This is just like authoritarian foot right on the necks of just like businesses, specifically in Europe, but as Justin described, basically across the world. What's your reaction to all this?
Jeez, I mean, it's overwhelming. First of all, Justin just provided a ton of information, and I'm still even confused on so many aspects of this. My first thought is this practical? Can they actually implement this? So, Justin, I mean, just in terms of the sheer practicality aspect of this, do you think that they will ever be able to actually enforce this around the world, or is this some pipe dream that European Union, leaders, think that they can, impose upon other countries, when in reality they're not going to be able to do that at all? That's my number one question first.
So the way that the enforcement of the law would work is every European Union country has to have essentially its own version of this, which has to be at least as strict as the law that was just passed by the whole European Union. Each of those countries is responsible for punishing the companies that would be related to it because they do business in their particular country. So France will have a department which will be responsible for punishing companies like McDonald's that do business in France if they're not in compliance with this up and down their supply chain, right? So there is going to be, and there's an incentive though for these countries to do this, to actually hunt people down that they don't like and figure out which countries are not, or which companies are not doing the things they want them to do, and punish them. And that is that the law allows for a 5% fine, 5% of net worldwide turnover, okay? Which again is similar to revenue. So for a really big company that's doing, say, billions of dollars in revenue every year, 5% adds up really quick. Right? Oh, yeah. So you're talking about tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars in fines over a long enough period of time. You could be talking about even more than that, right? So there's a revenue generating aspect to this from a government's perspective. They have an incentive to do this. The other thing that they put into the law, which I think will lead to enforcement in a variety of different ways, is they allowed for what's called a private cause of action, or they mandated a private cause of action. What a private cause of action is a citizen or an activist group or a nonprofit or even a group like the Heartland Institute can bring a lawsuit against companies for failing to comply with the rule if there's some sort of damage that can be claimed to someone or something. So, for example, if some German court agrees that McDonald's is not sufficiently transitioning to a green economy and they're therefore damaging the environment, they can bring an activist group in Germany can bring a lawsuit. A court can say, yep, we agree with you. And now you can fine McDonald's for not sufficiently doing this. And it's not just about whether McDonald's is doing it. Is McDonald's working with suppliers who are not sufficiently doing it? Is the potato farmer sufficiently doing the things that they need to do? Then if not, then they could theoretically bring a lawsuit and do that. So the question, will this be enforced at all? I think it's absolutely, because at the very least, you're going to have activist groups going absolutely insane in Europe, suing everybody all the time over this. So for sure, on that level, you're going to have that, especially on climate change and things like that. But there's a financial incentive for the governments to do it as well. Will they do it to everyone, everywhere, catch every little thing? No, of course not. That's not the point. The point of the law is not to do that. It's to punish the people they don't like. So they will selectively enforce it in order to accomplish whatever sort of political or ideological goals they have that week.
I think
Can I just follow up with a like a follow-up question to that? So I'm not completely clear on the corporate structure of like a McDonald's or a Ford, whether or not they have like their headquarters here in the United States, or North American headquarters, and those are separate entities from their like European operations. But how could a European country, whether it's France, Germany, whatever, impose a fine upon an American-based company? And how could they do that when they don't have the sovereignty to inject, fines and such and punishments in the United States of America? Like how would that actually be done?
So
would it only apply to their European, operations and such?
So the fine would be based on, so the fine would be imposed on any company that's a covered company under the law. A covered company under the law are the large corporations, whether they're based in the European Union or they're based in Mexico or based in America, it doesn't matter. As long as they do enough business in the European Union, they would be a covered company. And so if they're not following the law or one of their suppliers is not adhering to these ESG things, regardless of where they're located, the large company that's doing business in Europe above that threshold is the one that gets fined, right? So Ford, regardless of whether they have a European headquarters or not, that's irrelevant to the law. They would, because they sell cars in Europe, they would get fined, okay? Based on their total net worldwide revenue, they would get fined because of something that they're doing maybe in Ohio. That's the whole point of the law, is to impose penalties on companies regardless of whether they're European companies and regardless of just what they're doing in Europe. And so do they have the authority to do this? Yes, they do have the authority to do this because because the larger companies are operating in Europe. So it would be like you had a European company dumping chemicals into a river in America somewhere.
Sure.
It doesn't matter if they don't have a headquarters in America. We can still fine them for dumping chemicals into a river. That's the same logic.
What's kind of crazy about this too is like, you would look at something like this and just think like how infeasible it is. You did a great job of explaining, how to like enforce all of this. But like what makes it easier for the government regimes to enforce this is the fact that we've spent several years now laying down the foundations for all of this with our United States centric ESG schemes, where essentially every business is preparing some ESG report every year and some sustainability report every year, where they're keeping track of all of these different metrics that are going to be used now against them theoretically by some other foreign power using the mandates of government. So it's like, all of these people, like I referenced earlier, on like the right side of the aisle, generally here in the United States, that kind of dismiss this ESG thing as voluntary interactions or whatever. Like they just completely just slept. They just ignored this whole creation of this foundation on which this monstrosity is built. That to me is one of the craziest aspects of this. Jim, you haven't you haven't been chiming in. The last time we talked about this, it was actually us kind of celebrating this very plan going down in flames with just like a week left in the European Union legislative, process or whatever. And there was still a question about whether or not there was going to be a post-credit scene where the hand comes lurching out of the dirt or whatever, and it's still alive. And I think you, being the more cynical of probably all of us here, you put your money on that hand reaching out of the grave. So not too surprised, I suspect here, but I mean, the scale of this has got to be a shocker to you, though.
My perfect record of being cynical about the results of policy and becoming correct remains intact, sadly.
Right.
People in the this podcast should be archived. You should go back to it for lessons on what's going on here. Congratulations to Justin and you, Donnie, for researching this and bringing it to the fore. What strikes me while listening to Justin outline all this, which I knew in broad strokes, but he painted a much more detailed picture for us, is that in the comments, some of our viewers here on YouTube were saying that, you know what, Trump is going to stop this. He'll stop funding to the WHO and perhaps even the United Nations. And I thought, well, he did pull us out of the Paris Climate Agreement. In fact, the founding president of the Heartland Institute, Joe Bast, was invited to be in the Rose Garden when Donald Trump announced that wonderful policy, which of course was reversed the minute Joe Biden got to the White House. But, it struck me looking at those comments, what's remarkable here is that there isn't an outcry in Congress or among any American politicians about any of this. I think they're, one, wholly ignorant of it. And I think that excuse is not going to hold up very much longer, especially because we are talking about it and other people will be talking about it as well. But it's obvious that the Biden administration wants this. They want America governed by unaccountable and unfireable and never voted upon European bureaucrats. So this is a complete polar opposite of philosophy here. You don't have to be a MAGA hat wearing America firster with the Trump flag right next to your American flag in your front yard. But if you are, you're a great American. To understand that this would be extremely harmful to American businesses, obviously, and to all Americans, to basically have the private sector, and this is what the left has been doing now for very intensely, especially over the last decade, is leveraging their power with their ideological fellow travelers in the private sector to impose hard leftism, communism, Marxism, what have you, but certainly not free market capitalism, the opposite of that instead, upon society. Not passing laws here in the United States, and in many cases, not even really trying to pass or try to sneak a regulation through the deep state and the bureaucracy, the real power center in Washington, D.C., past the courts, and they'll find friendly courts to approve these sorts of things. But basically just, offsourcing economic tyranny in the United States to Europe. Now, we call it European ESG, which is a lot easier to remember and say than I can't even remember now. There's like
Corporate
5 letters.
Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. I have it tattooed on my arm.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. But actually, it reminded me. And I'll try to find it when I'm done with this. I'm almost done with my little soliloquy here. I remember seeing a chart yesterday, I think it was, on how during quarterly earnings calls for corporations here in the United States, the number of times over the last 2 years they have mentioned their efforts on ESG and DEI. And the chart, it was a bar chart. It went way up like this. About a year ago, it was as high as it's ever been. And now it's dropping and dropping, dropping. And now mentions of a corporation's ESG scores and our DEI initiatives have dwindled down to even less than when this topic just started bubbling up in 2021.
You're welcome, America.
Yes, that's right. You are welcome, America. We've helped that happen. But, so maybe what we will have then is it's a tough Biden economy. American corporations are having very difficult and contentious earning calls for their shareholders every quarter. And they have stopped talking about ESG almost entirely, and now just want to talk about trying to turn a profit as a corporation. So it could be, ironically, here that it will be corporate America that has had enough of this and will look at this and realize we need to push back at the Biden administration, which we own and operate as big business in America, and tell them to put a stop to it. But if the election turns out that Donald Trump is our next president, I think he will do what, frankly, any American president should be doing, which is leveraging America's power and influence to put a stop to this stuff. Like, hey, the WHO, I guess maybe we won't give you any more money. Hey, maybe the United Nations, headquartered here in the United States, you should be able to use that power to stop this absolutely anti-business, anti-American policies being implemented by people nobody ever voted for, nobody even knows who they are, on our society. Maybe we'll get a president that will do that one day.
Yeah, I've been trying to track some of the questions that I referenced earlier in the chat that were coming up. One of them was specifically how they would enforce this, which Chris already asked to Justin. And while answering that, you kind of answered a couple of the other questions. But there was one by, I think, Christine here that said, how is it that like Europe is like dictating like global laws, basically? And Justin, feel free to hop in on this. But my initial reaction to that question is basically like, well, I mean, theoretically, if we're talking about Apple was one of the examples, if they didn't want to like conform to this laws, they could theoretically pull all of their business out of Europe and strictly do business in any other place other than Europe to avoid being caught up in these laws. But I just don't suspect any like global corporations would ever do that. When they're doing their cost benefit analysis of this stuff, they're probably looking at the bottom line and being like, you know what, we already like virtue signal about half this stuff anyways, so we might as well just conform to these laws, instead of trying to like fight it in any way. Justin, your response to that question?
That's kind of true. So I agree with the second part. I don't think that these major corporations, which already have, as you pointed out, massive ESG systems in place in their own companies, so much of this they already agree with and they're already doing it, and that's why we've been talking about the Great Reset and ESG and stuff like that for a long time. But the other part of it that you have to remember is that what you're describing almost only works if all the large corporations get together and leave at the same time. Because like you used Apple for example. So let's say Apple says, we're done doing business in the EU because we don't want to have anything to do with this. This is too much of a headache and too much of a problem. We'll never be able to get all of our supply chain in order. So they leave. Okay, that's fine. But Apple is a supplier of a lot of other businesses. They're giving computers, they're supplying all sorts of things, right? Services, think about their cloud services and everything. So if they're doing business with another major business that's doing business in the European Union, then they're going to be brought into at least some of it that way as a supplier.
Right.
So in a lot of ways, most large companies are going to be brought in either because they do business in Europe or because they do business with someone who is doing that business in Europe. And so from their perspective, why would they get out of the market when they're going to be pulled in other ways anyway? It almost it wouldn't make any sense for them to do that. So unless all the American companies that do business in Europe and all of the, it would have to be all the American companies that do business in Europe all get together and say, we're not doing business in Europe anymore, we're gone. Sure. And all the American companies that do business with a business that's in Europe would also have to say, we're not doing business with those companies anymore. And what you're asking is, it's just not possible. And that was why they wrote it. And so the question of, well, how can they do something this audacious? Well, how did they market this in the European Union? What did they focus on? The law is massive. It's 100+ pages long, but it references a bunch of other laws and international agreements in the law. And the law is really just a framework for individual EU nations to create a new law. So we're talking about laws on laws on laws, right? Like tons of laws here we're dealing with. But the thing that they talk about all the time when they're pitching this idea is basically 2 or 3 things. One is climate alarmism, which in Europe, the vast majority of people are climate alarmists compared, relatively speaking, to the United States. So that was a very appealing argument. We got to stop these companies from polluting the earth and destroying the planet, and we're all going to die from climate change if we don't do this. The other 2 things were child labor. So you've got these African countries and certain parts of Asia and stuff where there's children, really young children, working in horrible conditions. Like we've talked about this a bunch of times in the Congo, how you have kids in the Congo in mines for rare earth minerals and stuff like that are used to produce parts for renewable energy. And so they wanted to stop that, which pretty much everybody would agree with. Yeah, we don't want little kids working in horrible conditions overseas. And then the other thing was like slave labor. So that's another thing that they're advertising this, right? So we want to eliminate slave labor from all these different supply chains. So it's not enough for you, European company, to say we don't have slaves. It's like, yeah, but you're doing business with suppliers in these other countries that do have slaves, and you're just turning a blind eye to it. And so they focused on those kinds of things, the things that we all sort of, not the climate part, obviously, we don't all agree with that, but we do agree about the child labor thing, and we agree about the slavery thing. And they focused on those things as the main thing. And that was really how they sold a lot of this. And of course, there's a million other things included in it. But when you when you frame it as an anti-slavery, anti-child labor law, it's not hard to sell that to a lot of people. And I think that was how they got away with it. And that's probably what critics will say. They'll probably say that anyone who's opposed to this, so critics of us, anyone who's opposed to this is pro-slavery, pro-child labor. That's probably what they'll say. They already have us on the climate denialism thing. So they'll just tack the other 2 things onto it and say, you guys don't care about all these human rights abuses. And they'll act like that's what the law is, when in reality, it's a million other things on top of it.
So there has been a couple of questions in regards to China. And I know that, we've been just like getting into like the meat of all of this. And we've got, competing theories about how all of this is exactly going to work out. And you were telling me just yesterday about this new contracts thing. For the sake of time, maybe we should not get into like some of the super weeds and some of this, maybe for a future episode, especially when we untangle some of this mess. But in regards to China, because obviously China is upstream and downstream of virtually every corporation's supply chain when you look at it at some high enough level. So the question is, how are they not going to be pulled into all of this? Like, aren't they just going to be like have a massive amounts of fines and being coerced and forced into all of these different metrics too? How is it possible that they are going to like slip through the cracks of this?
So there's no exception in the law for China. So all these horrible things that are going on in China would presumably need to end in order for this thing to be enforced equally across the board. I just don't think it will be enforced on China. And I think the reason for that is because we've seen a long track record of countries of not holding China accountable. And so we think that that's the way this is going to work. And the way the law is structured, remember what I said, the EU passed this law. The EU law requires that each individual EU nation create its own law. And then that law has to be enforced by that EU nation. So if the EU nations just say, well, we can't enforce it on China because like we really need China for cheap crap, or for rare earth minerals to run our renewable energy system that they supposedly want to impose across the European Union. If they can't, if they just don't enforce it, then that's one way they might get around that. The problem with that, of course, is you have these far left activist groups that will bring lawsuits and complaints saying, we don't care about cheap stuff. We don't care about it. We demand that China get in line. This is the law. And they're going to be suing. And I don't know how that's all going to play out. I've been talking with Heartland's research editor, Jack McFerrin, has been working with me on this for a while now in the weeds, getting into the weeds of the law and everything. And he and I have had a long conversations about what this law will mean for the European Union. And Jack is sort of taking the position that, this is horrible. And in the short term, this is, it is going to be the end of freedom in America in a lot of ways. We're just giving up our sovereignty to the European Union. But you know what I think? I think that at the end of the day, this is going to just crush the European Union, and they're just going to collapse into dust, because eventually the far left wing activist types will force the European Union to start imposing this on China. China's going to say, screw you. We're just cutting you off. We'll do business elsewhere. And Europe will its economy won't be able to survive that. And I think there's a pretty good argument to be made that's a legitimate way of looking at this, because this is so bad and so stupid of a policy. It reminds me a little bit like on steroids. This is an old school Heartland topic. Donnie, you're going to remember this.
Oh, God.
Back in the day when we used to talk about normal, boring stuff, we would talk about millionaires' taxes. And there were these wealth millionaires' taxes that some states would put into place. And they would essentially say, if you have they had different versions of it, but it was usually based on your assets. If you had a certain amount of assets, they would impose like a wealth tax on you. And what happened when you would do that, right? Well, from the left's perspective, this was great. We bring in all this revenue from these horrible rich people. They're hoarding wealth. But the obvious thing everyone knows would happen is the rich people just leave, right? They're like, well, we're not going to pay this. And there were examples of this happening where states would impose these taxes and then just all the rich people left. They'd say, well, we're not going to stick around for this. And it was so obvious. And you would look at this and say, what were these people thinking? Of course, the rich people are going to leave. They're not going to stay and pay this absurd tax. They're going to leave. It's so easy to do. Well, in a lot of ways, this kind of looks like that, where it's like, how is anyone going to be able to do this? And they're just banking. They're banking, I think, on having another 4 years of Joe Biden and another 4 years another many years of radical leftists in Canada and radical leftists in other parts of the world that all just sort of agree with this anyway and aren't going to fight it and are going to twist the arms of these corporations. And then in the back room, when the corporations are complaining and moaning and whining about this, these big, these politicians and bankers and stuff are going to say, look, we'll take care of you. Just do what they say. And we'll make sure that you get the money. We'll have the subsidies. We'll have more government programs. We'll have more money printing at the central bank. You're going to be fine. You're going to stay rich. Don't worry about it. And that's how, and the reason I think that's how this might work is because that's how it's been working for a while now. Yeah, and I think that's how this all plays out.
Chris, you almost have to applaud the hubris of these bureaucrats in Europe for passing this, because like we were talking about, it was down to the wire. The whole idea, even Justin was saying this, that's they basically have to get it passed now because these elections that are coming up looks like we're going to have a rightward kind of lurch in the kind of the political makeup of Europe. So they have to get this passed now, or they're not going to be able to get it passed for 5-10 years from now. And they did, right? So it's the hubris of them to try to pass something like this, knowing that the voters in Europe are going to basically, slap all of these people on the wrist when it comes to the ballot box for these exact same policies that they've been pushing for a while now. I think it's pretty much accepted fact that the kind of the rightward shift in the political makeup in Europe was largely in response to the draconian climate policy rules, whether it's the restrictions on fertilizer or pesticides in agriculture that led to all of the different outrage in some of those countries that we've talked about, or some of the other stuff that led to the yellow vest riots and all of that. And it's just so even when they're staring down the barrel of the gun when it comes to the response to their policies, they're still going to push this. What's your reaction to that and just the general election shakeup in Europe?
Yeah, well, I think the pendulum is swinging the other way. And I think we saw this in 2015 with Brexit, and the fact that you're England knew better. England knew that the European Union was not in its best interest, so it stayed out of the euro for the time being. But then once the European Union just got too all encompassing and trying to micromanage every single thing across the continent, England said, enough is enough. We want to go our own direction. I still hold out hope that other countries within the European Union, namely Germany, France, and a couple others, will do the same thing, and the European Union will collapse. Because I think the European Union is just completely, bonkers. It's just gone so far outside what it was meant to be. It was meant to just, be a common economic zone. It was meant so that the European Union could, people could, move freely between the countries. And they have taken that and just gone in such a crazy direction. The crazy climate policies, the mass immigration, just all the regulations, all the micromanaging. I think the people of Europe are fed up with it. I think the elections for the EU that just occurred last week show that the people are fed up with it. I hope that the next iteration of the EU does something about this, and I just hope that this blows up in their face. And I hope that this is also just maybe possibly the beginning of the end of this, like just this stupid globalist, agenda that, just does not make sense, is not practical. And I really hope that, Donald Trump wins in November and just says, we want nothing to do with this, and good luck trying to implement it.
Right.
And, I still think that the United States has a lot more influence around the world than Europe does. And, when you look at the size of the U.S. economy, our military prowess, I mean, Europe should be listening to us, not vice versa. Like, come on, this is not 1850 anymore. We are the global superpower. They need to be following our lead. So I just think we just need to put things back in its proper order. And I do think a lot of this is the fact that, President Biden and his America Last policies and trying to appease, Europe, and just trying to appease everybody is part of why this is happening. We need strong leadership in Washington, D.C. We need a strong president to say, listen, Europe, this is not going to fly on my watch, and good luck, doing it. And I would hope that he plays hardball. And if that means tariffs, if that means whatever, do what has to be done to nip this in the bud. Do not let this take hold. Do not.
Yeah, we are. So this podcast I just kind of want to dedicate to just raising the awareness of this issue, because even when I was trying to find links to put in the show notes about this, if you look this up, like CSDDD Europe, whatever, you just Google these certain terms, it's like Justin's Fox News article, and then there's a Western Journal article that comes up that's specifically talking about Justin's appearance on the Glenn Beck show. And that's it. Those are this is the only links that are out there right now. So we have a lot of work to do just to raise the public consciousness when it comes to this issue. When it comes to the solutions, that's going to be a different episode. In fact, we're over here trying to figure out solutions to this, basically as we speak. Justin and I were just talking before the show about some potential things. We've had some talks in the past about some potential things. So we need to figure out what is the best kind of course of action to pushing back against this. I was going to toss it to Chris or Jim, but Chris looks like he wants to jump in.
Yeah. Just one more thing, because I've seen this pattern before, and I've seen this happen, over the past few years. You guys are doing an amazing job of finding something that not many people are talking about. And I think they want it to be that way on purpose, whether it's ESG, modern monetary theory, the Great Reset. And it's just so amazing that you guys put it out there. And then once the conversation gets started, what do? They then deny it. They deny it, call it a conspiracy and all this, crazy stuff. But then years later, it's like, well, actually, we're doing it. And here it is in front of you. So how many times are the people going to fall for that? I hope not anymore, because like Justin said, this is a humongous threat to liberty. Not only just, our economic prosperity, but just our ability to live free lives. And we need to get it out in the public, realm. And we need to make sure that, the vast majority of hardworking Americans, who I'll bet you anything, say this is insane, stop this, in its tracks. Got to make sure that message is getting, clearly, to Washington, D.C. and to state, capitals across this country to say enough is enough. We will not allow this to happen on our watch.
Yeah. So
you
we're
guys
north
are
of it.
you guys are doing, just amazing work.
Yeah, we are doing our best, folks. I'm gonna go to Jim, and then I'll end it off with Justin to wrap up the show here, because we're already north of an hour. But Jim, I mean, some of what Chris was talking about, like the kind of a rebuke to like the globalist movement or whatever, it just kind of reminds me of the episode we did a couple of weeks ago about the what was it, like populism versus globalism or something along those lines. And this just seems like a perfect example of that. It's like they see the polling, they know they're going to go down because of all of this climate policy stuff that they've been pushing, the banning of combustion, whatever, gasoline powered cars or whatever. And they're still going to push this. Like, it's just like they know that the public doesn't want it. They're still going to just jam it down the throats of not only their constituents, but the constituents of everyone in every country around the world. It's not mind-blowing. Like, this is almost par for the course. But what's your reaction to it, Jim?
Well, the globalist clique keeps trying to make fetch happen. I mean, keeps trying to make ESG happen, right. And it's not gonna happen, or it's not happening. So I found those charts. I just want to show it to our audience here. So I found these charts about how often ESG is mentioned on earnings calls, and here it is up on screen. There we go. So this was percentage of earnings calls mentioning ESG, and it's bumping around there around 1% to 0% from 2005 to 2019, and starts to go. And then 2020 and 2021, by the second quarter of 2021, 19% of earnings calls with shareholders mentioned ESG scores. And then, but then you can have, that was kind of near the peak, and then it starts coming down. And so, the years 2021 and 2022 were kind of the peak for corporations all buying in to the leftist dream of leveraging ESG and DEI and all of those top-down, socialist agenda items through the private sector. It starts to diminish because you can't make fetch happen if fetch don't make you money. Eventually, these corporations just have to, they get pressure from their shareholders. I mean, I think of Disney as a great example. They've gone completely woke, and they are their stock price keeps going down. They keep having failure after failure at the box office. And so, eventually you do run out of of your shareholders' money, and they start holding people accountable. But, part of the second part of this podcast, and we're past that now, we're almost done here, but was to kind of look at the European elections and to see that is actually tied into this sort of thing. I think you mentioned it, Donnie, that they crammed this through, like the hand came out of the grave at the last minute to get this passed in the European Parliament, because they knew a voter-led revolution was happening in Europe. And it's a revolution against green policies. When you have farmers protesting with tractors, and the beautiful sight of spraying liquid manure on European bureaucrat office buildings in protest, when you have the immigration problem is now so acute in Europe, so-called refugees coming in, and the same thing is happening here in the United States, and the voters don't like that, and they are revolt. There's a revolution against that. And it's been actually kind of almost humorous to see the reaction of the corrupt corporate legacy media, both here and in Europe, in that parties and policies and platforms that got the majority support of the people are yet still far right. Anything 1 inch to the right of a Marxist globalist is far right. But it's not far right. It's common sense. It's people wanting to preserve their way of life. It's people refusing to be shoved into a Marxist box and to live their life the way their supposed betters instruct them to do it. This is all to the good. And this what we've talked about on this podcast today, what Justin and you, Donnie, have laid out in books, with Glenn Beck, and especially Justin with that great backgrounder for us on this podcast, is that I think the people are not going to put up with it. While these things are officially law, I don't think they're going to get away with enforcing it. I don't think they can get away with enforcing it. I guess we will see. And then maybe we will have leadership in this country that pushes back on this. And we return to a society in which we, the people, select those who govern us, not rule over us. And they rule, or they govern us with our consent. Everything that was described in the top of this podcast is a complete opposite and goes against that principle. And if America is still America, we're going to stand up for that.
Justin, I said I was going to end the show with you, good sir. This is your moment in the sun here. You've been, like I said, you've been talking about this for. This is it. You've been talking about for this particular issue. You've been talking about this for so long, and finally, I think this is the. Like the alarm bells are going off, man. Like this is everyone gets to your stations moment when it comes to this.
I know
issue.
It feels like a little bit like, you ever seen that movie Conspiracy Theory with Mel Gibson?
Oh, sure.
He's like trafficking in conspiracy theories, and he's got this like little newspaper that he does from his crappy apartment, and he just and then he finally finds out at the end. That's the whole plot of the show. He finally finds out all these conspiracy theories. He's actually got one right.
Mel Gibson in that movie is my spirit animal. But
I believe it. So I mean, that's kind of how this. I've been talking about it for 3 years, and I think a lot of people just sort of people who usually publish the things I do. I mean, usually they just didn't really get it, or they didn't want it, and now it's here. And so I'm going to finish this off with just one paragraph from this law. All right, there's 100-something pages, one little paragraph that talks about just one of the things that every company, just keep in mind, all the big companies that are doing business in Europe, American companies too, would have to do this, and they would have to impose this on many of the companies that they're doing business with all over the world, including in America, completely transforming our society. There's just one tiny little shred of what's in this law. It says this: depending on the circumstances, companies need to consider additional standards. For instance, taking account of specific context for intersecting factors, think intersectionality, including, among others, gender, age, race, ethnicity, class, caste, education, migration status, disability, as well as social and economic status as part of a gender and culturally responsive approach to due diligence. That means government behavior. Companies should pay special attention to any particular adverse impacts, not adverse treatments, but impacts, effects on individuals who may be at a heightened risk due to marginalization or vulnerability or other circumstances, both individually or as members of certain groups or communities, including, among other groups, indigenous peoples. This is the kind of stuff that's in this. It's going to transform every single part of how these businesses operate. And someday, if we don't tell people about this and they don't find out about it, we don't have politicians fighting against it, you're just going to wake up one day and everything is going to be even crazier and woker than it is today. It's going to be a funhouse mirror distortion of this country, and most people are going to have no idea why, and it's going to be because of something like this specifically, transforming society, culture through businesses and corporations and all the rest, and how this we're all downstream of this law is how this is going to work out. I do believe people will fight back against it. I do believe we can stop it. I do think that once Republican politicians, as bad as they've been in a lot of ways, I think will fight back against this. I think if Donald Trump is president, he would push back against it. But none of those people right now, or very few of them, know about it. And we're working on changing that. We're fighting for that every single day. I had a special with Glenn Beck last night on television talking about it. I did his radio show a couple times on this issue, or one time on this issue. I know that certain members of Congress have now seen some of this information. I published an article for Fox News about this. We've got a policy paper that we're going to send out to thousands of state lawmakers. We're putting the final touches on that. So we're doing things. We're trying to fix it, but we're just one group of people. We need everybody fighting against this if we're going to stop it, or else America, we're completely screwed. There's just no other way around it. We're screwed if we don't stop this. So hopefully everyone watching this shares it with somebody out there that they know. Just listen to this one episode of In the Tank and you're going to have your mind blown. That's the only way that we end up beating this thing.
Absolutely, and I can't think of a better kind of rallying call to help support the work that we're doing here, whether it's Heartland in general or this show in particular. Like I said, there is a new way of supporting the show because YouTube demonetized us for talking about issues basically like this. So we have to do a workaround for you all to support our show, which we have a new link. Heartland.org/inthetank. So if you go to that, you can donate specifically to our show. But yep, like Justin said, we've got a lot of work to do on this issue. Surely we're going to be talking about this on episodes in the future, especially as we produce more tip sheets and have some solutions and all of that sort of stuff on this very, very important issue. But that's going to do it for this week's In the Tank. I want to thank you all for joining us and join us every week for a new episode of In the Tank podcast. For those audio-only listeners that are catching the show probably on a Friday or later, leave a review for us on iTunes. That would be greatly appreciated. And consider joining us live on Thursdays at noon Central Time, where we are streaming this on YouTube and Rumble and X and Facebook or whatever. Join the conversation live. Throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comment on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. And you could also help the show out by hitting that like button, sharing this content, subscribing if you haven't already, or just leaving a comment under the video. All those things help break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. If you'd like, you can follow us on X at In the Tank Pod, or you can send us your comments, questions, or suggestions to the show by emailing us at inthethankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
Jay Lakely on Twitter, X at Heartland Inst on Twitter and X, and always visit heartland.org.
Fantastic. Justin T. Haskins, same question to you, good sir.
At Justin T. Haskins on X. Also, go to Glenn Beck's YouTube channel or go to the Blaze TV. You'll be able to watch the special that we did last night on this topic. If you go to the YouTube channel, the show's going to come out sometime later today. And he does a fantastic job breaking all this stuff down. So I really encourage people to check that out.
Fantastic. And Chris Talgo, what do you have to pitch today?
Well, I just hope everybody goes and reads Justin's Fox News article and shares it with friends and family members, because the only way that this is going to be defeated is by getting the word out.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you to everyone watching, and we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
He's a lion, dog-faced pony soldier.